You work more hours per week than a medieval peasant, more than a Roman slave on a good week. And this is the part that should actually make you angry, more than your own ancestors did 50,000 years ago, back when there were lions in the grass and no such thing as a grocery store. That's not an exaggeration to hook you. It's a documented, peer-reviewed finding, and by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly how a species with 0 supermarkets, 0 refrigeration, and 0 safety net still ended up with more free time than you have right now. Here's the number to sit with first. The average person alive today will spend roughly 90,000 hours of their life at work. That's not a rough guess. That's about 1/3 of every waking hour you'll ever have, handed over in exchange for money. For almost the entire existence of our species, that concept didn't exist. No jobs, no wages, no boss, no performance review, and yet somehow people ate, survived, raised children, and built the exact same brains and bodies we're walking around with today. So the honest question is, if they weren't clocking in anywhere, what were they actually doing with their time? We don't have to guess because anthropologists have spent decades actually measuring it. In 1963, a researcher named Richard Lee did something almost nobody had bothered to do before. He lived alongside the Jew/Hwansi people of the Kalahari Desert in Botswana, one of the last surviving hunter-gatherer societies, and tracked exactly how they spent their days, hour by hour. What he found broke the assumption most people still carry around today. Adults spent roughly 2.5 days a week acquiring food. That works out to about 17 hours. 17, not 40, not 60. The rest of the week was, by his own account, essentially theirs to spend however they wanted. If this were a one-off fluke, you could dismiss it. It isn't. The same basic pattern shows up again and again across groups with nothing in common except the way they get their food. The Hadza in Tanzania, the Ashe in Paraguay, the Martu in the deserts of Australia. Completely different continents, different climates, different diets, different everything. And the number keeps landing in roughly the same 15 to 20 hour range per week spent on core survival tasks. For comparison, if you work a standard job today, you're putting in something close to double that before you've even started commuting, cooking, or doing chores. Now, a fair objection. Those are modern hunter-gatherer groups, living today, not literally our Ice Age ancestors. How do we know ancient humans actually lived this way tens of thousands of years ago? This is where the evidence stops being observational and becomes something harder to argue with. It becomes skeleta. When researchers compare the bones of early farming populations against the bones of the hunter-gatherers who came before them, the difference isn't subtle. Early farmers were shorter. Their bones show clear signs of nutritional deficiency. Their teeth are riddled with cavities, a direct result of a diet suddenly dominated by starchy grain instead of varied wild food. Their spines show arthritis from repetitive grinding labor, bending, hauling, threshing, day after day, and on average, they died younger. Now look at the hunter-gatherer skeletons that came before farming. Taller, stronger bone density, healthier teeth, less joint degeneration. The bones themselves are making an argument, and the argument is that these people were not grinding through relentless labor. If anything, the fossil record says the opposite of what we assume, but the single most surprising category of evidence isn't about survival at all. It's art. And art, if you think about it for even a second, has no business existing in a life defined by constant desperate struggle. You don't spend hours on decoration when you're one bad week away from starving. In 1994, explorers stumbled into Chauvet Cave in southern France and found paintings that are roughly 30,000 years old. Horses captured mid-stride, lions rendered with actual shading and a sense of depth, rhinoceroses drawn with an understanding of anatomy and movement that took real observational skill to produce. This isn't a child scribbling on a wall. Someone sat deep inside a cave, working by flickering firelight for hours, maybe across multiple sessions, refining these images, not to eat, not to defend against a predator, but because they wanted to make something beautiful or meaningful or both. Go back even further to Blombos Cave in South Africa, and you'll find perforated shell beads dated to roughly 100,000 years ago. Small small holes carefully drilled through seashells so they could be strung together as jewelry. Here's the detail that makes this genuinely strange. The nearest coastline was about 20 kilometers away. Somebody walked a 40-kilometer round trip specifically to gather shells, then spent additional hours painstakingly drilling holes through them with nothing but stone tools. Not for food, not for a weapon, to look good. And then there's Germany in 2008, where researchers uncovered a roughly 40,000-year-old flute carved from a vulture's wingbone with 5 precisely spaced finger holes. Whoever made this understood something about pitch, about spacing, about how sound works, and they invested serious time and skill into an object whose only real function was music, not hunting, not shelter. Music. None of these are isolated, one-off curiosities. Across Europe, Africa, and Asia, sites tens of thousands of years old are consistently filled with decorative objects, tools crafted with far more precision than pure function would ever require, and items that clearly demanded hours of focused, patient work with no direct survival payoff. This is what people did with the time that wasn't spent chasing food. They created, they decorated, they made ordinary things beautiful for no practical reason at all. So let's actually walk through what a typical day probably looked like, because the shape of it is almost nothing like yours. You wake up naturally around dawn with no alarm. Your body decides when you're done sleeping. The fire from the night before is still smoldering. Someone tosses on more wood. Breakfast is whatever's left from yesterday. Cold meat, maybe some nuts or berries gathered the day before. And it's social. People are talking, catching up, loosely figuring out the shape of the day. Not because anyone's assigning tasks, just because that's what humans naturally gravitate toward doing together. Sometime in the mid-morning, a small group might head out to hunt or gather more food. But here's the detail that upends the modern instinct. You don't necessarily go every day. If the hunt 2 days ago was successful and there's food stored, you might not leave camp at all. Instead, you might spend the morning repairing a spear, weaving a basket, softening an animal hide with a scraping tool. This isn't work in the way we use that word. There's no clock, no supervisor, no quota. People do it because craftsmanship matters to them, because being good at something earns real respect inside a small community, and because making things well is simply part of what it means to be a functioning adult in that world. When hunting does happen, forget the frantic chase scenes from movies. Humans are biologically persistence hunters. That means tracking an animal at a slow, steady jog, not a sprint, for hours until its body overheats and it physically collapses. Humans are one of the only species on the planet that can sweat efficiently while moving, which means we can literally outlast almost anything that's faster than us over a short distance. The hunt, door to door, might take 3 to 6 hours including travel. Then the animal is carried back, butchered, and shared out. Everyone eats, and by early to mid-afternoon, the productive part of the day, for lack of a better phrase, is essentially done. What happens for the rest of the day is the part modern people genuinely struggle to picture, because it doesn't map onto anything we do anymore. People rest. They sit in the shade. They talk. They play with children. They groom each other, actually picking through each other's hair, a behavior that sounds almost primate-like because it is, and it exists specifically to reinforce social bonds. They make jewelry out of shells, teeth, or beads. They carve small designs into bone or stone, not for any purpose beyond the act itself, and a lot of the time,